What's up, everyone? Today you're about to see my interview with Mark Bello, who is a former attorney who now is retired and writes legal fiction. So, he was kind enough to send me The Final Steps, which is one of his newest books, which is a legal murder mystery, and I just wanted to add a little review about it before the interview. It's not the main focus of the interview. We talk about everything from his entire career to all of his different books, but I thought that I would add this on real quick before the interview. So, The Final Steps itself is, like I said, a murder mystery in which a basic plot is Rosaline, who is one of the main characters, is doing her book tour across universities, and one of the universities that she's at, one of her best friends, Tyler, works there. Now, she and Tyler are having a conversation where a law professor comes up to her who says that he is a fan of her work. And Rosaline sees through Tyler's interaction that he is not a fan of the professor at all, and they go off, and then 15 minutes later, that professor is found dead on the sidewalk. And Tyler's pen is found right next to his body on the scene. Now, Tyler is one of the main suspects in the case, and now it's up to Rosaline to try and figure out who committed the murder and to also clear Tyler's name. I don't know if anybody's ever read any of the Theodore Boone books, but this book felt very similar to that in the sense of it was really easy to understand everything that was happening. There's nothing happening where the legal terms are being thrown out and you're not understanding what's happening. The book is pretty simple to follow along in that sense. But it also does a really good job of spreading the mystery out, sprinkling in the little clues here and there, but also not giving away easily who the murderer is going to be. I would really recommend anybody who's a fan of the legal fiction or maybe the murder mystery subgenre to check it out, and I hope you enjoy this interview. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am here with Mark Bello, who is a attorney who is also an author. Mr. Bello, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. How are you
So,
doing today?
good. How are you?
I'm
So,
great.
before we talked about books, I actually wanted to first ask a little bit about yourself. Can you tell me a little bit just about yourself as a person separated from you as an author?
Um, as a person, I'm a father. I'm a grandfather.
There we go.
I'm a brother. I'm a son. I practiced law in the Detroit area in
Mm-hmm.
Michigan for about 40 years before I retired. Um, I like sports, as we just discussed off the recording.
Uh-huh.
Uh, the Tigers and the St. Louis area share a history,
Yeah.
as we discussed. I'm a big baseball fan. Football, when you're a Detroit Lions fan, it's frustrating to be a football fan, but they're supposedly going to be good this year, so we'll
Getting
see.
better. They're getting a lot better.
The problem though is that their first game is with Kansas City Chiefs.
Oh, I know. I can't wait.
So what a break that was. Anyway, when I retired from the practice of law years ago in the 1980s, probably before you were born,
A little bit.
I handled a case where two boys were abused by a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, unlike today, that kind of an occurrence was a dirty little secret. They did not. There wasn't a quote scandal.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't well known. It wasn't something that the church was actively trying to do something about. And in fact, they were actively trying to cover those kinds of occurrences up.
Right.
So when the case was over and we were successful, I said to myself, one of these days, I've got to write a book about this experience. It's unbelievable that a major religious institution would treat people like this.
Mm-hmm.
And 30 years later, when I retired, I wrote my first novel, Betrayal of Faith. It's an embellished fictional account
Mm-hmm.
of what it felt like to take on, as a David lawyer, a Goliath religious institution.
Yes.
And the book was successful and won some awards, and it launched my author career. And ever since then, at the age of 65, then uh, I've been writing novels. I've written now 8 Zachary Blake novels. I wrote recently a cozy mystery novel, which I think you read. I sent it to
Mhm.
you, and I've written 2 children's books. So I'm having fun. I can't say I'm making a living doing it, but let's call it an expensive hobby.
What before again we talking to you as an author, I am pretty interested to learn about a little bit more about you as a lawyer. That is actually the field that I hope to go into.
Okay,
What where did you go to school?
I went to school in law school,
Uh-huh.
Thomas M. Cooley Law School in Lansing, Michigan.
And what type of lawyer did you become?
I handled tort cases, primarily personal injury, auto accident, premises liability, some malpractice, medical malpractice,
Hmm.
some product liability cases, and unusually for my practice, this clergy abuse case that I just told you about.
Yeah.
And as a result of that case, I handled a few of those.
Hmm. Has there was there ever a case when you were practicing which you would like maybe consider to be other than the case that or would you consider to be maybe your like coolest case or maybe your most exciting or the one that you had the most fun in a way?
Well, that was the one.
Was that the
It
one?
wasn't. It wasn't fun. Um, it was fun. The result was fun. Getting justice for my clients, getting fair compensation for something that they tried to cover up and actively lied about.
Hmm.
It was fun exposing them. It was fun, hard work. Uh, you know, do we equate fun and work in the same sentence? Uh, Work isn't typically fun. Work is work. Fun is fun.
Hmm.
Uh, the outcome, the success of the case, uh, the result was fun. The actual experience, being treated the way we were, being lied to, having our clients uh, treated like they were the bad guys rather than the good guys,
Hmm.
not fun. But
Um,
but that was the case of my life, no question.
when you decided to retire, did you decide to retire because you felt that you were fulfilled with your time as a lawyer, or was it that you thought that maybe now might be a good time to start writing that book I've been thinking about?
I would say a combination of both. The word tired is contained in the word retired.
Hmm.
I was kind of tired. It was the one thing I would suggest to you as somebody who wants to be a lawyer is consider the fact that you're fighting 24/7.
Hmm.
The practice of law is a battle. You versus them, uh, case after case after case. If your clients aren't completely satisfied with what you're doing, you're fighting with them.
Hmm.
You're fighting with the judge who doesn't want. You're the one who brought the case to his courtroom. If you're a plaintiff lawyer like I was, you're the guy who's clogging up his docket, so he's mad at you. The other side, uh, they're happy you brought a case, but they're fighting you tooth and nail
Hmm.
on achieving a good result. So, it's a tough way to make a living. You're constantly fighting, and 40 years was enough.
Hmm.
Uh,
What when you retire, right, you've now launched into the process of writing your book. How long did your first book take you to put out?
well, it depends on how you look at uh, life. Got in the way.
Hmm.
I handled the case as a young lawyer. I was 32 years old when I
Hmm.
when I handled that case. Um, it it was difficult. It was a hard-fought battle. I traveled to 7 different states,
Mm-hmm.
taking depositions and tracking down witnesses. Um, and I decided when it was over, still in my 30s,
Mm-hmm.
that I would write a novel about it one day. It was like a bucket list item.
Uh-huh.
Um, I didn't expect it to take 35, 40 years, but when I retired, I picked it up. I picked it up several times and started to write it. First as a nonfiction book, and then I decided it'll be a much more compelling account if I write it as a fictional novel. So I embellished it and made it more entertaining, for lack of a better way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a neat book. It's a very interesting read. But it picking it up and putting it down for 20 or so years.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until 2016 that I began to write it in earnest. And when I did that, it probably took about 6 months.
6 months.
And I would say every book after that has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 months.
What was your biggest, I guess, not doubt. What was your biggest maybe concern when writing your book or going through the publishing process? Was there anything that you kept on thinking of like, oh no, this might happen, or I'm a little uncertain of something happening?
I don't think I experienced anything like that. I disappointment in not being able to get an agent or a publisher to pick up the book.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up self-publishing it, which is something that people do far more often today than they were doing back when I started my author career.
Oh, for sure. It's everywhere now.
So that was disappointing, but learning that I could publish the novels myself rather inexpensively. And my first novel cost me a lot of money to publish because I was pretty ignorant about how the business and the industry worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasted a lot of money getting my first book published and marketed. I've learned a lot. You can do this yourself, and you can do it successfully without spending a lot of money. Um, I would suggest to people who are looking to publish their own books that they be careful and avoid a rather predatory environment out there
Mm-hmm.
of people that are looking to take your money. So be careful, is my advice to budding authors.
So you publish your first book, right?
Right.
What after that makes you want to keep on writing and thinking, you know what, I think I'm gonna do this.
Well, actually, I didn't. I wrote the first book. As I indicated earlier, it was a bucket list item.
Mm-hmm.
I was very happy with it. I thought it was it is and or was and is a good novel. It's got a lot of uh, positive 5-star reviews. It's
Mm-hmm.
won awards. It's been a successful novel. I thought I was going to be a one and done author, and then the 2016 election came along, and I don't know what your politics are, Rick, but um, I was concerned as the election rhetoric unfolded that perhaps a self-professed bigot would become president of the United States. Somebody who wanted to build walls instead of bridges, somebody who wanted to ban a religion from the country. That's offensive to me.
Mm-hmm.
So as the election was unfolding, not really expecting Donald Trump to win the election, I wrote a novel called Betrayal of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about a bigoted president who wanted to make America pure again, uh, Pure, pure.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to build uh, a wall on the northern border and the southern border. He wanted to implement a Muslim ban and ban immigration on the southern border, for example. A parody, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
on what I was hearing during the campaign. Surprise, he wins the election,
Yep.
and he basically tries to do a lot of the things I predicted he would try to do in this novel. And I get attacked on social media by a bunch of Trumpies
Mm-hmm.
who say I did a hit job on President Trump. And my response to them was I wrote a book, a fictional account of the worst nightmare of a campaign
Mm-hmm.
you could think of. I embellished the hell out of it. If you see similarities between the character and the situation I created and your guy, that's on him, not on me.
Mm-hmm.
I I was writing fiction. He made it fact. Uh, and once I wrote that book based on the 2016 election,
Mm-hmm.
kind of what I call ripped from the headlines, I realized that I didn't need to experience something personally to write a book about it.
Yeah.
And I followed that with um, 6 more Zachary Blake novels, a new cozy mystery that you mentioned in the beginning, The Final Steps.
Yes.
That's a new character for me. And I'm having fun. I've enjoyed writing novels about um, actual occurrences in the news, and
Mm-hmm.
I've enjoyed writing a couple of whodunits now. My last Zachary Blake novel was a whodunit called "You Have the Right to Remain Silent," and then I wrote this new novel, The Final Steps, which was released last April,
Mm-hmm.
which is also what they call a cozy mystery about a murder and trying to unravel who done it.
Yeah.
And then I also wrote 2 children's books, one about one a safety novel or a safety picture book about distracted driving, and the other about bullying in elementary school. My theory is that if I can reach children about important topics of safety and social justice at earlier ages than we're reaching them now, maybe we can prevent those kinds of things from happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're reaching kids too late.
What would you say when writing your books is, let's say, not your first book, but the books that you have now made based off what you've seen in the world and maybe trying to create a story around that. What's the
Right.
toughest part when writing these books?
The toughest part. I can't, I don't experience writer's block too often.
That's good.
I can't say that I've had a tough time writing books. They're easy to research because they're based on actual events, so you can track the events. Um, I maybe creating alternate scenarios
Mm-hmm.
that fictionalize them rather than simply writing a an account of what specifically happened that would make the book a nonfiction account rather than a novel.
Mm-hmm.
You do have to embellish. You do have to be creative. You do have to take a topic and make it perhaps more interesting, if you will, than the actual topic is in the news.
Mm-hmm.
The 2016 presidential election is a good example of that. While that was an interesting election and almost surreal,
It was.
um,
They had one of the debates right here in St. Louis.
but my account of it was even more entertaining. Let's put it that way.
Um, when you have, let's say, sorry, let me try this. Do you ever have trouble, right? You say you don't have writer's block, but do you ever when you write your books, do you start writing with an end in mind, or do you make it up as you go along?
That's an interesting question. In the industry, we call that being a plotter or being a pantser,
Hmm.
writing by the seat of your pants. There's actually terms for that, plotter, pantser. I'm a pantser. I do not outline my books. I do not have an end in sight. I essentially start writing, and the book takes form as I go along.
And have you ever outlined a single one of your books, or I
Actually,
mean,
this last one,
other than your first one, of course, where
the final steps was the first book I ever actually sat down and wrote an outline for.
and I wouldn't say like when reading the final steps, right? You said this was a little different from what else you have done. This is a new novel, and especially too to me when I was reading it, I'm sure you know who John Grisham is.
Yep,
He has written a series called Theodore Boone or Theo Boone, and
right.
it's like kid lawyer, and I felt that and those stories are like it's like he's like a high schooler, and he's very his parents were law firm, and he's like kind of helps around. And to me too, like I when I was in like middle school, I enjoyed reading those books so much just because like the way that I felt that the book is able to convey a lot of knowledge while also making you invested in a character story. I felt the same exact way with this book because when you're able to, I feel like when it's the perfect balance between a book, especially as something like a legal mystery, in which you're able to convey knowledge about a certain aspect while also giving the reader a character and a story that they can be invested in that makes them keep flipping the pages.
Well, I do try to balance educating people on the law
Mm-hmm.
and how the legal system, both criminal and civil, and I can explain that if you want. There's two different aspects of the legal system
Go ahead.
that my books cover. But while I'm entertaining, I do try to educate. So, for instance, if I write a book about a police officer shooting an innocent black man in a traffic stop, which I did,
Mm-hmm.
it's called Betrayal in Black, or I write a book about a school shooting, which I did, called Betrayal High. Um, those are compelling topics.
Right.
They
We
make
see
they
them. It
make for
happens.
they make for interesting novels. But what I also try to do is explain what will happen if the cop is charged criminally.
Mm-hmm.
What will happen in the civil case if Zachary Blake, my protagonist, handles the case on behalf of the widow of the black guy who was shot. How the civil justice system will handle that, how the criminal justice system will handle a case against the cop.
Mm-hmm.
What burdens does the prosecution or the plaintiff have? How do you defend a case like that? Those things those things are present in my books, as well as the entertaining aspects of um, good versus evil, David versus Goliath, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, to your point about John Grissom and Ted Boone, I think his name is Ted, the kid. I might be wrong. Um, uh, you'll find those things that you enjoyed in those books in the Zachary Blake books as well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the who done it aspect that the Final Steps has, the only Zachary Blake novel that has that who done it element, the mystery element in it, is a book called "You Have the Right to Remain Silent," my last Zachary Blake book. Um, in most of my novels, other than those two, there's a rip from the headlines type theme, like a school shooting, or a an event that we're all familiar with in the news, and then if you want to call it a mystery, the mystery is how will the system deal with it, and what will the results of the case be?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a criminal case, will the perpetrators be brought to justice? If it's a civil case, will adequate compensation be delivered and a satisfactory result?
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what each of my novels are about. Other than those last two,
When you are writing, right, the final steps, this is like it's a murder mystery. Um,
correct.
how when you come to a book like this where you know that you have to take the readers on twists and turns, and you got to make sure that you want to get to a point in the book where the reader doesn't see it coming either. How do you go about that process? Because you said this is one of the first books that you've actually outlined.
Well, I wrote "You Have the Right to Remain Silent,"
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about fun earlier. Writing is fun. Practicing law is not fun, but writing is fun. And I want to have fun with a book. Um, Writing a mystery is fun. You basically uh, the reason I outlined it is because for the first time I wanted to know the outcome
Uh-huh.
um, before I wrote the meat that gets you to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have sequential steps leading to a logical conclusion. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to write a book that nobody could ever have imagined who done it, but I didn't want to write a book that was easy to determine who done it.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of people write reviews that say that um, they guessed the outcome, but not many. So it's fun writing an outline to a whodunit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you basically try to subtly. I don't want to ruin the book for anybody, but you provide some subtle clues here and there.
Uh-huh.
Um, Not obvious, but they're there that lead people to a conclusion. Uh, do you dodge and weave like a boxing match where you know you again before you were born, Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman and used a strategy called the rope a dope,
Mm-hmm.
where he basically sat on the ropes and let Foreman punch him relentlessly until Foreman punched himself out. And Ali
Oh, yeah,
knocked him
I've
out.
seen that. I've seen that.
Um, uh, a, a whodunit novel is a rope a dope. You're basically trying to reel a reader in to this conclusion. Oops, no, it's not that conclusion. It's that. Maybe it's this conclusion. Maybe it's that
Mm-hmm.
conclusion. And you basically try to introduce a number of suspects and have the reader choose which suspect is the correct. Almost like if you remember the old series again before you were born, Columbo. Columbo would spend an hour and a half meeting new people and giving you clues as to who did it, and you were to guess who it was. Perry Mason was like that. The old Perry Mason legal. One of the very first legal novels were the Perry Mason novels that the TV series was based on. So a whodunit is like that, and
Mm-hmm.
what you try to do is introduce a number of characters who could have done it, provide some clues to the reader, and let the reader try to guess. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully I've done a good job of both cluing them and confusing them at the same time.
Right, because I mean, when it's the nature of the whodunit genre itself, I feel like at this point there's so many things that it could be considered its own subgenre. that like it's fun for the reader, or maybe if it's a TV show or a movie to watch, or like it's part of your experience when reading or consuming any form of media that
No question.
you want to get it.
No question.
Like I mean,
Part of the intrigue of a mystery novel is, did you guess right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Which I'm never able to guess right, but
Yeah, you are. I'm sure you've guessed a few of them.
I'm never able to get them every single time. Even if it's a movie too, almost never got it. And then it's like I've like what was it? I think I watched the new Glass Onion movie with my family, which is like the mystery. And like 30 minutes into the movie, my mom just turns to me. She's like, "It's gonna be this person." What do you know? Like 2 hours later, she's right. I'm like, "How do you know this? They haven't given us any clue." She's like, "It's obvious." I'm like, "It's not obvious." Some people are just really
TV
good at it.
TV's a little different than books,
Oh yeah,
and I'll give you a little tip on guessing a TV perpetrator. It's the biggest star. If Zachary Blake in a movie was played by, I don't know, Tom Cruise,
hmm
obviously Zachary Blake's not the perpetrator. Of the people he's pursuing, who is the biggest star? Whoever that is usually the guy
It's
that did
usually the one who did it.
it. You don't have that in a novel.
That's true.
So it's harder in a novel to guess who done it. So cut yourself some slack.
I'll
And your
implement
mother
that one
and your
next
mother
time.
and your mother's older and wiser than you are. So
That's true.
maybe
That's
when
true.
you're your mother, you'll be able to grasp the art
Yeah.
of guess. But again, if the author's done a good job, it shouldn't be that easy to guess, right?
hmm
I don't know if you read Final Steps from beginning to end, but did you have an inkling as to who did it?
A little guess. I'm around 75%
Okay.
done. So
Okay.
I'm not
There's a
fully there. I'll let you know as soon as I finish the book
All right. All right. There's a couple of clues in there.
whether I got it or not.
All right.
But
When you finish the book, I want you to read through the first 3-4 chapters a second time
mhm,
and look for clues that lead you to the conclusion, the
gotcha.
actual conclusion.
hmm
And you'll say to yourself, "Oh, I missed that one. Oh, I missed that one." And that's what again, I'm struggling with, what do I give away here?
hmm
Because I certainly don't want to make the book obvious for potential readers who watch this
hmm
show. Um, but there are clues in there that leads you to a conclusion if you look for them.
hmm There are, right? I feel like every time I go, or like if I ever like stumble into like a bookstore or something, I feel like I see more and more legal novels these days in general. Are have you had any conversations with any other like legal authors? Have you guys ever like talked about it, maybe seen like compared the different ways of writing? Have you ever had
Well,
any
I would
conversations?
I would love to do that, but I'm not in their. I don't want to say I'm not in their league as an author. I think my books are every bit as good as theirs. I'm not in their league as a celebrity.
Uh-huh.
So a John Grissom would not talk to a Mark Bello if I tried to contact him. He's a celebrity author, and while I think my books are as good or better than his because they're mine, and I have confidence in my both my legal acumen and my writing ability,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as famous as he is. So part of this process of, does this author talk to that author? That's based on fame, and I don't have that kind of fame.
Not yet.
Not yet.
If you had told somebody, right, I'm an author, and they're like, oh, what are what are the three books that you would tell them to read so that they would understand who you are as an author? if you had to give them three books to read out of the ones that you've written?
Well, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, I like all my novels, and I like different topics. So if your interest, for instance, is in criminal law, you might want to read Betrayal of Justice, the book about the presidential election,
Mm-hmm.
because the underlying case in that book is a criminal case. If you're a civil lawyer or interested in civil law, then you'll like Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High. Even though there's a criminal element, the suspenseful part of the book is how the civil case will turn out. As an author, all of the books are my babies.
Mm-hmm.
I I have TLC and love for all of them. I will say, uh, from a maybe I'm being self-critical. I don't know, but I believe I'm getting better at this.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read the first novel and you read the eighth novel, I would hope that the eighth novel is better than the first novel.
Mm-hmm.
The first novel is a very compelling, terrific book that I just rewrote, by the way, and I took out about 25,000 words that I thought were uh, reading it again. In fact, I not only rewrote it, but I created a new cover for it.
Uh-huh.
That's Betrayal of Faith today.
Looking good.
Um, it is about 50 pages shorter than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So the rewritten version of it is, I think, better than the original version of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I rewrote it. So I would encourage people that are interested in my work to read my first novel now. If you can get your hands on the old one,
Uh-huh.
I'd be interested in the comparison. Um, but I really like You Have the Right to Remain Silent. It's a neat book. I wouldn't say though this book is better than that one. It's different.
Mm-hmm. I'd have a couple more questions. One, I know you said you love all your books equally, but is there one book that you would still consider to be maybe just your favorite book that you have written? Whether it's come like this might be just because you have bias towards it, or just maybe objectively you just feel like this is some of my best work that I have done with my personal writing style.
You know, whether a book is good or not is is a reader's decision, not a writer's decision.
Mm-hmm. Because to every
Um,
writer, their book is good.
what I will say is writing Betrayal of Faith from personal experience was very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
A Writing a first novel and publishing it and having it win awards and having it be solidly reviewed was very satisfying. So from a personal standpoint, Betrayal of Faith is my greatest accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
As I just indicated, though, I just rewrote it because I didn't really think it was necessarily my best work.
Right.
It's a great book, and it's even an even better book now. But I like to think that I progressed as a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and that
So with every
books
book, you figure out your writing style more
book
and
book
more.
6, 7, 8 should be better than book 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, people love books 1, 2, and 3, and they love 4 and 5. The book about the school shooting is really a compelling story about a school shooting. You feel If you read that book, you feel like you're in the middle of a school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Book 4, Betrayal in Black, about the cop shooting the innocent black man in the traffic stop shooting, um, is a really interesting book, and I'm proud of it because it tells the story of a school shooting, of a racial traffic stop shooting,
Mm-hmm.
cop to citizen, from multiple points of view. Uh, we tend to think in that setting that the innocent, unarmed citizen is the good guy and the cop is the bad guy almost automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, shooting an innocent citizen unarmed is a terrible thing. And I'm not defending cops at all for having done that. Uh, George Floyd was a terrible thing, and the person who did that deserves to be where he is. In my book, though, you have a white cop who didn't realize that he had racist tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
He honestly thought that his life was in danger when he shot the man. And he's tormented in the book with his decision to shoot the guy.
Yeah.
And you feel for him, just as you feel for the widow who lost her husband. So, what I try to do in the book is take the points of view of both sides
Mm-hmm.
and put them out there for people to decide
Who they agree with.
who's the saddest victim here.
Mm-hmm.
It's more. There's more to it than just this is the bad guy and this is the good guy. And I try to do that with my novels in general,
Mm-hmm.
except maybe with the white supremacists. Those are bad guys.
Yeah.
I have a book about. It's based on the Kavanaugh hearings about a evil judge who decides who has a sexual assault in his past and decides to cover it up and doesn't care how he gets that done.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably the most evil character I've created in my work. So yeah, I can create a pure evil character. But what I try to do in some of my books is create a gray area where it's not pure evil, it's not pure victim, it's not pure perpetrator. There are shades of gray in between. And it creates for some compelling reading.
And I feel like personally with me, I feel like the most impactful stories are generally told in such a way. I feel like if taking maybe a step from away from books here, if you look at maybe media, the most loved, let's say if you were to go into like the superhero genre, the movies which have done the best or have captured the heart of most audiences are the ones where the audience can make an argument that the villain is also right in his own way. And like I feel like that side of when you have to choose as a consumer of who is necessarily wrong in this scenario. And like when you get, like you said, when you get into that gray area of you can make a valid argument for both people, I think that's when whether it's a book, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a movie, I feel like that's when it gets into impactful, really impactful. Because I mean, the truth is that a lot of the real world is that way. I mean, there's like a million sides to each story. It's generally not your traditional good and evil. There's generally a mix of the two as well as that gray area that you described.
Sometimes sometimes there is.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's good and sometimes there's evil. Uh, Again, I would recommend to you specifically read Betrayal in Black
Mm-hmm.
and Betrayal High for this kind of compassionate villain, for lack of a better term. Yes, they did bad things. What was their what caused them to do it?
What was the
What was their motivation? And what was their feeling or their mood post incident. Were they tormented by what they did, or were they very happy with what they did?
Mm-hmm.
In Supreme Betrayal, the book about the Supreme Court candidate who commits a sexual assault and tries to cover it up. By the way, just for your listeners to understand, as a law student,
Mm-hmm.
he's committed this sexual assault against a young woman who is now Zachary Blake's client.
Uh-huh.
She's basically allowed him to live his life and work his way up the ladder, remaining silent. He decides to, the president appoints him as the candidate for the Supreme Court, and that's a bridge too far for her.
Mm-hmm.
So she decides to come forward. He's covered up this crime for 20 years. He's probably the most evil character I've created, other than maybe a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist. But I mean, this guy's a bad guy. There's nothing he won't do to become a Supreme Court justice. There's a lot of difference between a guy like that, who you can't help hating, and the two characters I just mentioned in Betrayal in Black and Betrayal High, the school shooter and the police officer who had no idea he was a racist until he commits this crime.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the interesting aspect of Betrayal in Black. If you asked me what book I would recommend people to reading,
Mm-hmm.
that would be one of them. That would be a high on the list. I really like the is he a good guy, is he a bad guy controversy
Yeah.
in Betrayal in Black.
And last question, I ask this to every single author who comes on. What advice would you give to someone who is an aspiring author?
Um, I have two little sayings when I'm asked that question. They're logos, if you will, of other companies or others entities.
Mm-hmm.
One is Just Do It, Nike, and the other is from Sesame Street. It's written about a song, but I would say it applies to a book.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to read. Just write. Now the way that line goes is it's about a song.
Uh-huh.
Don't worry if it's not good enough for anybody else to hear. Just sing. But it applies to writing and reading as well. First, write for yourself. Whether it turns out to be good enough for others to read is a determination you can make later.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, don't worry about it. Just do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Bello, for coming on. This was
My pleasure.
amazing.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
so much. You had great responses, lots of really cool stories. And for everybody watching, thank you for watching. Please check out The Final Steps and all the other books that Mr. Bello has written. The Final Steps, I'm reading it right now. It is really, really good. I promise that if you start reading it, you will stay reading it. And I will see you guys in the next video.